Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. My name is Billy Dees. If you have never heard our program before, we are most of the time an interview and a commentary podcast. You can find the Billy Dees podcast pretty much anywhere podcasts are found, including iTunes, Apple Podcasts now, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, TuneIn, on down the line. On the phone with me right now, I have Dr. Tara Sanderson. How are you, Doctor?
I am doing just fine, Billy. How are you?
Pretty good. Now, you're in Oregon, right?
I am out here in Tigard.
Is it hot there right now? Because I'll tell you, Ohio right now is really hot.
No, it's actually really mild. We're in the just low 70s, and it's just been gorgeous the last few days.
Yeah, that's the temperature you want to be at, I guess, most of the time. Dr. Tara Sanderson is the author of Too Much, Not Enough, a guide to decreasing anxiety and finding balance through intentional choices. Tara Sanderson is a licensed psychologist, author, and clinical supervisor in Oregon. That's kind of what we just talked about. For over 20 years, Tara has been helping people learn the skills to live their best lives using tools from cognitive behavioral therapy, motivational interviewing, mindfulness, and dialectical behavior therapy. She specializes in working with clients who struggle with perfectionism, overachieving, anxiety, and depression. That sounds like my resume. Perfectionism, overachieving, anxiety, and depression. Yeah, that's pretty much my bio. Seriously, I have had bouts over the years with depression, and I also have struggled with OCD. Mm-hmm. And I feel that for the most part, I have that under control, although it still gets me. I'll tell you the one that never really goes away is making sure the doors are locked. Mm-hmm. I drive my wife absolutely crazy because every time we leave, I always got to go back and make sure the door's locked.
Check one more time.
Check one more time. Mm-hmm. And as long as it's one or two more times, I'm okay. But when you start getting into 3 and 4, that's when my alarm bells start going off and say, hey, this is enough. So now we talked about you're in Oregon. Where are you from? Is that where you've been your whole life?
I have not, actually. I'm from California, and actually all my family is still down there. I moved up to Oregon to go to graduate school, and then met my husband, bought a house, and just stayed. I just never left. Is
there something about the area that intrigues you, something that you just really like about it, or?
I really do enjoy the weather. We get really beautiful summers.
Yeah.
The rain is, I recognize the rain is for a purpose. It keeps our state beautiful and green. And the people are wonderful here. I really love it.
That's fantastic. When you were in school, you mentioned going to grad school and all these other things. When were you first inspired to get into the fields of mental health?
I have a really strong memory of being in high school, and I took an AP psychology class. Back in the day, AP classes were very rare. Like my little rural high school had like 3 AP classes you could take.
Sure.
So I felt really special to be in an AP class, and the AP class that they offered was for psychology. And I remember my professor or teacher at the time saying that psychology was really about understanding people. And my parents had gone through a divorce earlier in my life, and I thought, gosh, I need to understand people because I don't want to end up like my parents with a divorce.
Yeah.
So I got super excited about it. All of this stuff made total sense to me, and I decided I wanted to grow up and be a counselor.
That's fantastic. I work with people in the mental health field, although I'm not a counselor. But I have a lot of admiration for the caring that seems to come with that field. I mean, I always got the impression that, everybody needs paid. We need the lights to come on and everything. But most of the people who choose to be in that field, I have found, aren't necessarily driven by big dollars. They really have a concern for their patients and want them to succeed. And is that something that you feel is in the field that you're in?
Absolutely. I actually teach a course for new clinicians on how to run a private practice, how to run a business. And the first lesson I teach them is you have to wear 3 different hats.
Yeah.
The first hat is your boss hat. The second hat is your clinician hat or your therapist hat. And the third hat is your employee hat. And when I talk about problems that come up in running their business, the first answers I always get are the clinician hat answers, which are things like, well, if it's better for my client, I'll do this.
Yeah.
Well, if I can squeeze it into my schedule, I'll do this. And I have to keep reminding them that, like, the yes and you're still a human and you need to, like, take care of yourself in this
Yes.
process, because therapists will give everything to make sure that their clients are okay.
I'll ask you this too. This is kind of off script, but this is something that I kind of ask people in your field, because it's something where I work. We really fight the stigma that comes along with mental health. And I feel that it's gotten better. In the field that I'm in, we also deal with addiction. And I believe we battled that a little bit more fiercely, the addiction stigmas, but it's still there with mental health. And we strive very hard to make sure people understand that you're far more likely, for example, to be a victim of some sort of a crime. You're far more likely to be taken advantage of by your own family when you're suffering from mental health than you are ever to be, like the Psycho movies. And I enjoyed those movies as much as anybody else. But quite frankly, just like with Jaws, it didn't do much good for sharks. And and with the Maniac movies really have fed the stigma that mental health people are to be feared. Do you deal with the stigma at all in your profession?
Absolutely. I think when people come into the office, one of the first things that they want to know is, wait, am I crazy? Does this mean I'm going to, like, hurt people, or is this so bad that I need to go to a hospital?
Right.
I have that conversation almost every session of, does this mean I can't take care of myself if I've got a mental illness?
Yes.
And the answer is often no.
Right.
A lot of times what we're dealing with is clinically significant issues, depression, anxiety, OCD symptoms, but most of the time they don't need to be hospitalized because of them. There is a lot of stigma that maybe something is so wrong that they won't be able to be safe with themselves.
Yeah.
And that's really only a small percentage of what the mental health diagnoses are out there.
Yes. So many people right now, especially with COVID and some of the things going on with the demonstrations and the disruptions in society, anxiety for a lot of people is a problem to begin with. Okay, but now with wearing the masks and the isolation, the social distancing, and on, it's really become acute for a lot of people. Let's talk a little bit about anxiety. So many times it gets equated with just being nervous, and I guess there's a component of that. But what exactly is anxiety, and how do you recognize that you have a problem with it?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of different symptoms for anxiety. I think nervousness can be one of them. I think excessive worry is one of them.
Okay.
I think that our physiological responses to stress can be one of them. We can have a lot of heart palpitations, or struggling to breathe, or feeling like we're going to pass out because of how we're thinking or how nervous we're getting.
Yeah.
Agitation can be a symptom of anxiety. So there's some elements of hopelessness that can be in there with anxiety. When I think about clinically significant anxiety, I think about kind of that stuckness where you kind of are running in circles, almost like on a hamster wheel of the what if scenarios and, what kinds of things could happen, or kind of going down these rabbit trails of, trying to predict the future, or trying to predict how to make something better or worse, or ruminating on the past and thinking, gosh, I shouldn't have said this or done this. Sometimes all the way back into third grade, you keep thinking about these situations that you can't do anything to change now.
Yeah.
And that keeps you stuck. And when we talk about it that way, it's not necessarily something that would be debilitating in a way that we would need to put you in a hospital necessarily, but it is debilitating sometimes where you can't really seem to function. Maybe you can't go to work because you're so stressed or so worried about what might happen.
Yeah.
Or you are, just frozen in bed thinking, gosh, if that person from third grade still thinks about me and knows that I'm this way, then, this is what the truth is for my future.
Yeah.
And those things can get really, they can just be such a huge struggle for people to just continue moving and navigating the life that we have.
Sure. In your book, you talk about the big T, and that's uppercase T, and the little t, and we'll call that one the lowercase t, truths. Can you explain a little bit about what those are?
Absolutely. And I think that this really applies to folks who struggle with anxiety, because what happens with a little t truth? Little t truths are maybe stories we've told ourselves. My favorite story that I tell myself is that I'm lazy, which is not true because I am an overachiever and I'm kind of a perfectionist and
Sure.
I struggle with all of the things and I think I can do more things than I really can. But I tell myself I'm lazy when I'm not doing something. If I'm not producing something, if I'm not active in some way, and I'm sitting there just enjoying a movie or taking a bath, then my inner dialogue says, well, Tara, you're lazy and you haven't accomplished anything.
Yeah.
That's a little t truth. That's a story I tell myself that I can find proof that says it's true. But that proof is all very shaded under clouds of, I'm only looking at times where I was sitting on the couch. I'm not looking at my whole life, right?
Right.
Big T truths are things that are a little more indisputable. So watching a beautiful sunrise, I can look at that and say, the sun rises. That's a capital T truth. That's a big T truth.
Yeah.
The sun does rise, right? If I say Mount Everest exists, that's a big T truth. If I say Mount Everest is beautiful, that's technically a little T truth. I decide that it's beautiful. You might not think it's beautiful.
Right.
That's because it's a little more subjective, right?
Yes.
So when anxious folks get into these moments where they're telling themselves these stories, I'm terrible, I'm fat, I'm lazy, my boss doesn't like me, all of my coworkers hate me. If we can start identifying those as little t truths and not look for the proof that makes it true, but look for the underlying fear and then attach that to what is the actual big T truth. My coworkers probably think more about themselves during the day than they ever think about me. Mm-hmm. That's much more of a close to a big T truth, right? My boss doesn't necessarily hate me. She may dislike something I've done.
Right.
So let's go find out what that is and deal with it, right? So trying to really move things away from my subjective point of view and to a more objective place.
I see. Interesting. Yeah, now, you talk about self-care, and I'm pretty sure that that's probably an important theme in lots of fields of medicine. Can you talk a little bit about self-care as it relates to anxiety and other things?
Absolutely. So when I talk about self-care with people, the first thing that usually comes to people's minds is go get a massage, get your nails done, take a bubble bath.
Yeah.
But those are the types of things people talk about with self-care. And I agree, some of those are actually very lovely. And I think self-care is a lot of other things too. I love brushing my hair as self-care. I can stand there for 10 or 15 minutes just brushing and brushing. I have these long, gorgeous brown hair. And I love brushing it. And that is self-care to me. For just a couple of minutes, I can just give myself just a little bit extra love to remind myself that I'm okay and everything's wonderful. Sitting out in the sun and just letting it soak into your face for a minute or two.
Sure.
Sometimes between sessions, I go and I stand out on the back porch of our office building and just soak in a little sun before my next session. That's self-care. Doing things that are engaging and exciting for you.
Yeah.
For my husband, that's playing video games. He, doesn't play video games all the time, but occasionally he'll take an afternoon and just play video games, and that's good self-care for him.
Sure.
I think we have to stop having self-care as something that costs money necessarily, or takes a lot of time, and really get down to what makes you feel good.
Exactly. That's an interesting concept because a lot of times, I was a caregiver up until about year and a half, 2 years ago, my mom passed away.
Mm.
And, that last 6 months in particular was very grueling. And one of the things that a lot of and by the way, where we are, the hospital, that the hospice program and everything, those people were just incredible, wonderful people. And one of the things they said is, you have to take care of yourself. As much as you want to stay awake all night, as much as you want to do those things, you simply can, because this could go on for months, it could go on for years. You don't know
Right.
when somebody's in that situation, in that state of decline, that sometimes it's over quick, sometimes not so much. And you can't sustain yourself without eating, without sleeping, without going out and just going to a restaurant, have somebody come in, which we did, so my wife and I could go out and just get away from it. And I think that one of the analogies that I heard, and I'll ask your opinion about this, is like when you're on a plane and there's a disturbance with the pressurization, the onboard instructions always tell you to put your mask on first and then help your children or help other people. And you can't do it. You can't help other people if you're passing out. And that's a great analogy. How would you feel? Is that a good way of putting it, or would you like to add to that maybe?
That is the exact analogy I give all the time. I think it is so apt in the way that it really comes down to your health and safety.
Right.
If you are going to be there for other people, if you're going to be doing your job well, if you're going to take care of your children or all of the things, there's got to be something in your cup already. You can't
Yes.
pour from an empty cup. You cannot help someone put their mask on if you're not able to breathe.
Yes. That's something that we really, in my dealing with people, that we always stress. You have to take care of yourself. In your book, you also talk about sober skills, and you have SOBER in caps. And would you like to explain a little bit about what that means?
Absolutely. So the sober skills comes from a mindfulness tool that they used in addiction services for a while. And I have kind of adjusted it a little bit to how it works for me and my clients most of the time. I would say that I use my sober skills probably 25 to 35 times a day.
Wow.
I'm asking myself these questions a lot. Mostly because the more you practice, the better you can become at doing it in times where it may not be the first skill you want to try.
Right.
So sober skills help us to make intentional decisions so that we are not full of regret and we are not frozen by too many choices or options.
Mm-hmm.
So the SOBER is an acronym, and I have people write it down on the left side of the paper as a long acronym. And the S stands for stop, which just means every time that you're at a decision, you take a moment and you stop.
Okay.
The O is for observe, and that's for people to observe both what's going on inside of themselves and outside. So one of my famous examples is, as I'm getting ready, as I'm walking into the kitchen, I just start opening the refrigerator door, the cabinets, that there's this automaticness, this autopilot that just says, ooh, I just want to eat something.
Right.
And sometimes, as I'm doing the observe part of it, I might say, oh, I'm bored. That's why I'm in here. I'm not actually hungry.
Oh.
So let me do something that challenges my boredom. Or I might go in there and say, I'm stressed. And that is why I want to pound a bunch of sugar if possible. Like, where are my mini chocolate chips? Like, I want them all. And if I can recognize, like, oh, I'm stressed, I know several other things I can do if I'm stressed besides eat. So I start looking at what's going on inside and outside of me. If it's, as I'm looking outside, it might be something like, I just got 5 emails from people who are upset about their appointment times, and that's what's causing the stress. Or it might be, I haven't heard from somebody in 2 weeks and I'm really worried. So just trying to identify what's going on here, just taking a pause on what's going on here. The B is for breathe, and I ask people to breathe 5 times. Not because 5 times is a magic number, but because 5 times gives you a pause between the instant that you want to do something and the actual reaction you're going to do, or the actual action you're going to take. It's basically just a buffer to give you a moment to say, oh, I just identified what is going on. Now, before I choose what to do, let me calm myself back down to a place where I can think logically and I can think intentionally. The E is for examine the options, and I ask people to come up with 5 options of how they can navigate this scenario. And I usually have them hold out their hand in front of them and pick 2 options that are extreme, and that's your pinky and your thumb, and then the 3 middle fingers are going to be kind of your middle of the ground or middle of the road kind of options.
Okay.
So the two extreme ones, I like to use the ones for kids, but feel free to make up your own extreme ones in the world. But the ones I use for kids all the time are like if they're mad at their parents. One extreme, the pinky, could be that you can run away to the circus because that's still a thing, and there are still circuses you can run away to.
Right.
And the thumb would be that you could just punch your parent in the face. Totally not a great decision, but it's a decision. It's one of your many choices. And we come up with those because then it like expands the box to your options. And when you pick the three in the middle, they're much more likely to be ones that you would choose.
Okay.
Most of us aren't actually going to choose to run away from the circus when things get hard, or run away to the circus when things get hard, or punch someone in the face, hopefully. Please don't go punching people in the face because you heard it on this show. But when we have those extreme options, we're much more likely to pick in the middle. And then the middle options might be you can walk away to your room. You can tell your mom that you need time to think. You can go eat a brownie. Like there are just options, right?
Yeah.
And then the last one, the R, stands for respond. So you pick one of your options. And the way that you pick one is by doing what's called the weighing test. Whatever you pick, you need to be able to pick it non-judgmentally, fully present, and be able to do it on purpose. So if the kid says, I'm going to punch my mom in the face, I go, great, let's go through the weighing test. Can you punch your mom in the face without feeling guilty?
Right.
Usually the kids look at me and they're like, no.
Right.
All right, well, we failed the weighing test. Let's go back to your options. They say, well, fine, I'll run away to the circus. Great. I can do that without guilt. Perfect. Can you do it on purpose? Well, I'd have to do a little research to find a thing, and maybe I would get distracted. Okay, so probably not that one. Well, let's look at your other options. And when you do something fully present, my example for that is always I go to, if I ever go to McDonald's, the McDonald's French fries are like my favorite thing ever.
Yeah.
And I always order the large because I think that's how many French fries I actually need. And the first few bites are just heaven, right? Mm-hmm. But then at some point you start shoveling 4 or 5 or 6 French fries at a time, and you've stopped tasting them and you're just eating them. Yeah. That's the difference between being fully present and doing something on purpose and being just doing something, right? Those first few French fries, you're tasting every little molecule of salt, you're at every little bite, and then after a while, you're not anymore. And that's how you can tell when you're not in the moment doing that anymore. Wow. And if whatever you're going to do, you're not going to do it on purpose, fully present, you might want to question whether or not that's what you should be doing. Yeah. And go back to the beginning and start sober again. And I think that's why I do it so many times a day, honestly, is because I start on a path and I think, yeah, this is what I should be doing. And then I notice myself getting distracted or I notice myself doing something else and I go, wait, maybe this isn't where I want to be. Yeah. Let me go back and start again and check in with myself and be really present in what I am doing.
Interesting. I'm probably going to have to try some of those things. Because I could go in 50 million directions. And that's something that I probably should work at a little bit. The difference between selfishness and selflessness, you have a contrast there that you would like to talk about a little bit.
I do. And it really ties back into that idea of self-care and making decisions that matter for yourself. I think people put selflessness and selfishness on a continuum as if they are the only two options in the matter of self. And I would like to say that maybe selfishness and selflessness are at the far ends of a bell curve more than they are right next to each other across the line. Like you have to be one or the other. Okay. So a lot of people tell me that they don't do a lot of self-care because they think spending time on themselves is selfish. Instead of it being self-love giving and filling of your own cup and being prepared to help others. Okay. And when we talk a little bit about what that means, a lot of them say, well, I was raised to be selfless, which means I always serve myself last. I always make sure everybody's got what they need. I put time towards everyone else but me. And I would say that maybe if we really want to think about it, if that's 2% of the time that we actually are fully selfless. And then we can maybe give ourselves 2% of the time that we can actually be selfish because we're humans and we can do that. But the rest of the time, we give ourselves permission to be in the gray area in between that just says, it's okay for me to take care of myself, because how I take care of myself and when I fill my cup gives me the opportunity to give more to the world, to my friends, my family, my coworkers. Gives me more room and capability to impact the world around me.
Yeah.
So it's this little balance in between of some seasons you're going to have to give more to yourself, and then some seasons you're going to give more to others, and you're much more flexible in the middle than you are being one side or the other. Almost no actions are going to be fully selfless.
Okay.
Almost no actions are going to be fully selfish.
Yes.
We need to recognize that middle ground where we are just doing what we need to fill ourselves and to make a difference in the world.
I never considered putting those two on a scale like that. Like you said, it's usually binary, and you have a scale that you kind of drift on one day or another, and that's a good way of balancing it out. I kind of like that concept. I'll wrap things up today with one of the things I used to say a while back on my podcast. I used to always end the podcast by saying, remember, the easiest person to fool is always yourself. And that brings us to one of the things I want to talk to you about here before we wrap things up, and that is the stories we tell ourselves. And you have this little thing here, they're not always the truth. And I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about that.
I think that I love that way that you used to sign off, because I think that is so true. We spend a lot of time in our own head.
Yeah.
Because that's where we are, right? And inside of that, we hold on to things that prove our point about something, because our brain is just trying to put things in boxes and have things where they go. Our brain is an organizer. It wants to have things be easily accessible when you need them. So the more you continue to think about a story that you've told yourself or a truth that you've told yourself, the easier and more accessible it is. And it means that your brain is always thinking about it and moving that direction. There's a reason that a lot of folks who struggle with depression, one of the activities we put them to do is to start a gratitude journal, to start looking at things in a positive light. Because when you're looking at things so negative all the time, that's all you're going to see.
Sure.
So we have to shine a little light in there and say, nope, look, there's other things. Don't forget, even if it's one or two things at the end of your day, thinking of them in a positive way can help.
Yeah.
I think that when I talk to people about the stories that we tell ourselves and how they're usually not true, I ask them to really challenge themselves, whether it's to say, if your best friend said that about themselves, what would you say?
Yeah.
And, that's usually an eye opener where people go, oh, well, I'd never let them talk to themselves like that. Oh, interesting. Why are you different? How come you get to talk to yourselves like that?
Exactly.
And really challenge those elements. I ask people a lot of times, whose voice is that? So if they say, well, I'm not good enough for this, or, my voice isn't important. Well, whose voice says that to you? When you hear it in your head, who is telling you that? And sometimes it's hilarious. Somebody will tell me, it was my third grade teacher when she just told me to be quiet because I shouted out an answer instead of raising my hand.
Yeah.
But that story has been with them their whole life, where they have decided, well, my voice isn't important because my third grade teacher told me to be quiet.
Really?
That's not a true story anymore. That doesn't mean anything about your voice and who you are.
Yeah.
That just meant at that moment, shush.
Yes. Yes.
But we took that story and ran with it,
Yeah.
right? We do that about our friendships, about how important we are, about our value and our worth. And it's super important for us to really ask those questions that dig down deep and make sure that we're telling ourselves the truth and not perpetuating a lie.
Yeah. It's interesting how a seemingly incidental interaction can stick with you for years. And that's something that, we should all be more aware of. That sometimes we have these little trips along the way that we constantly are looking for all the time, and it really should not affect our stride. It happened 2 miles ago. You need to concentrate on the road ahead. And you bring up some fantastic points, and you really have a great way of dealing with them. We have been talking to Dr. Tara Sanderson, and I'm going to say the book again, Too Much, Not Enough, a guide to decreasing anxiety and finding balance through intentional choices. Now, where can people, first of all, get the book?
It is available on Amazon on plenty of little platforms. You can buy it on paperback, hardback, audiobook, and e-reader.
Fantastic. Too Much, Not Enough by Dr. Tara Sanderson. Where can people find out more about you, your social media, website, other things like that?
You bet. I tried to make it as easy as possible. My website is drtarasanderson.com, and all of my social media handles are the same, Dr. Tara Sanderson.
Yeah, that's great. And you know what? A lot of times people don't do that. They come up with all these cutesy little screen names. And I mean, I guess that's fine on the one hand if that's what you want to do. But you really, from a marketing standpoint, and that's kind of my gig, I can tell you, be consistent on all your platforms. I always tell people, make sure you have the same avatar there so people can recognize you on Instagram when they find you from Twitter and they know it's the same person and all these other good things. So that's fantastic. Dr. Tara Sanderson, the book, Too Much, Not Enough, a guide to decreasing anxiety and finding balance through intentional choices. Thank you very much, Doctor. It's been great talking to you today. Thank you very much for being on the podcast.
Thank you. It's been so fun talking to you.
Well, thank you. And I also want to thank our audience. Thank you very much for checking out our podcast today. You can find me, if you like, on Twitter at Billy Dees, and I also am Billy Dees across the board. Real easy to find. Thank you very much for checking out our podcast today, and we'll be talking to you again next week. Well, hello everyone. I am Billy Dees from the self-titled Billy Dees podcast. You can find me on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and many more of the best podcast networks. Join me for my commentary and interviews. Follow me on Twitter, real easy to find, at Billy Dees. I am Billy Dees. I'd love to have you listen in.